when my son's new wife looked me in the eyes and said, "Oh, we got married yesterday." Only special people were invited. I felt something break inside me. That one sentence shattered not just my expectations, but the illusion that I was still important in my son's life. I had helped raise him alone. I had paid their rent, bought their furniture, even funded her dress, and now I wasn't special enough to be told about their wedding. That morning, I stood in my own living room, surrounded by the echoes of my generosity, wondering when love had turned into a transaction. But before we continue, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel. It helps more than you know, and don't forget to leave a comment telling us where you're listening from. We love hearing your thoughts and stories. This one isn't just about betrayal or money. It's about awakening. What do you do when you realize the people you loved the most only valued your wallet, not your presence? What happens when you finally say, "Enough"? This is the story of how I went from being the man who gave everything to the man who finally took his life back. For 3 years, I wired $700 to my son Brian and his fiancée Emma every single month, no questions asked. Rent, groceries, furniture, car repairs, even emergency weekends away when they needed to reconnect. I paid for it all. I did it because I believed in them, in their future, in family. I told myself that's what a good father does, especially a widower like me who raised his son alone after his mother passed far too early. And so I gave, and gave, and gave, never imagining the day would come when they'd plan an entire wedding, tie the knot, and deliberately not invite me. Not even a phone call, not even a photo. When I asked, Emma just smiled and said, "Only special people were invited." I still remember how my hand trembled around the phone, my breath caught somewhere between disbelief and rage. I'd bought her dress. That very month, I had given her $800 for personal expenses, which I later saw went straight into that white lace gown she wore, proudly in photos posted all over social media. Her parents were there, her siblings, her friends, champagne, flowers, even a small band, but no seat for me, the man who paid for it all. And Brian, he just looked away, like a boy caught with his hand in the cookie jar, except this wasn't about cookies. This was about dignity. I went home that night and sat in silence. Not out of sadness, but out of something colder recognition. Recognition that I had been financing a fantasy, an illusion of family love that had long since stopped being real. I wasn't angry at Emma. Not really. She had always been transactional, always sweet when she needed something, distant when she didn't. But Brian, my own son, that cut deep. And still, the next week, as if nothing had happened, she called me. "Harold, rent's overdue. The landlord is threatening to evict us. I think you forgot to make the transfer." Her voice was shaky, like she was the victim, not the one who had humiliated me. And maybe 3 years ago I would have rushed to the bank. Maybe I would have felt guilty, felt responsible. But not this time. Something inside me had changed. "Emma," I said slowly, "didn't I tell you I only help special people?" Silence. Cold, hard silence. I could almost hear her panic. "Harold, I don't understand. We've always been special to you. You're like a father to me." Lies. Honey-dipped words, rehearsed and manipulative. The same voice she used when asking for money for the honeymoon, for the ring, for the dentist, for the vet bill, for the loan that somehow never got paid back. And I had played the fool, thinking my generosity would eventually be repaid in love, respect, even just a little gratitude. But the wedding was the final straw. I had gone from being a father to a financier, from being dad to being a direct deposit. And the worst part? I let it happen. I enabled it. I encouraged it. I even felt proud when I talked to my sister, telling her how much I'd helped Brian and Emma, how they were building a life together, as if my name was etched in the foundation of their home. In a way it was, just not in the way I imagined. That night, I sat at my kitchen table, the same place I had once mapped out monthly budgets, planned birthday surprises, and wrapped Christmas gifts I never got thanked for, and I started doing the math. $700 for rent. 36 months, that alone was over $25,000. Then the groceries, the Target runs, the emergency repairs, the holiday flights, all of it added up to $38,600. I had pulled from my retirement savings, from the little nest egg my wife and I built before cancer took her. She wanted that money to support my peace in old age. Instead, I used it to support two fully capable adults who didn't even think I deserved a seat at their wedding. The realization was a gut punch, but it also lit a fire in me I hadn't felt in years. The next morning, I called my bank. I canceled every automatic transfer. I locked down my accounts. I set up new passwords, and even made a quiet visit to the hardware store. "Mr. Becker," the owner said, surprised to see me. "Something broken at Brian's apartment again?" "No," I said, with the calm of a man reborn. "This time, it's for my house. I need new locks, the best ones you have." While his son prepped the replacement hardware, I made another call, this time to my lawyer. "Mark," I said, "it's time we updated my will." His voice softened. "Something happened?" "Let's just say," I finally opened my eyes. For the first time in decades, I was no longer worrying about whether Brian and Emma had heat, or groceries, or Wi-Fi. I was thinking about myself, what I needed, what I wanted, and how much time I had left to reclaim my life. And I intended to reclaim every minute. That same afternoon, I sat by the window with a cup of black coffee, no sugar, no cream, watching the world outside without the weight of anyone else's needs pressing against my chest. It was a quiet I hadn't felt in years, not the kind of silence that comes with loneliness, but the kind that whispers, "You're finally free." I didn't check my phone. I didn't wonder if Brian was going to call, or if Emma needed money for something that suddenly became urgent. Instead, I let the minutes pass without agenda. Around 2 in the afternoon, I did something I hadn't done in nearly a decade. I took a walk just for myself. No errands, no transfers, no lists in my pocket. I strolled down Maple Avenue past the park where I used to take Brian as a boy. I could still picture his chubby fingers gripping the swing chains, his giggles echoing through the trees, the way he used to run into my arms and say, "Daddy, push me higher." When did that little boy disappear? When did he become the kind of man who could stare at the floor while his wife humiliated his father with a fake smile and an exclusive wedding? Maybe he never changed. Maybe I just refused to see it. I stopped in front of the bank, the one where I had made transfer after transfer like clockwork. Mr. Harding, the branch manager, spotted me through the window and waved. He had handled my accounts for years. I stepped inside and walked straight to his desk. "Mr. Becker," he greeted me kindly. "Is everything all right?" "Actually," I said, "it's better than it's been in a long time. I'd like to review my account protections. Make sure no one has access but me." He nodded, his expression respectful. As he pulled up my records, I could see it in his eyes. He knew. He had seen my statements draining month after month, watched the pattern. He just never said a word. Until now. "I don't mean to intrude," he said carefully, "but I've seen you do a lot for your family over the years. I just want to be sure you're not being pressured." "I was," I replied, "but not anymore. This is my money, and I've decided it's time I start spending it on the person who earned it." As I left the bank, I felt a strange lightness in my step. My shoulders were no longer carrying other people's burdens. My wallet was no longer an open faucet. My time, my precious, limited time, was mine again. But that lightness didn't last long. When I returned home, 3 cars were parked in front of my house. Brian's, Emma's, and another one I didn't recognize. My chest tightened. I had forgotten one thing. They still had keys. Because like a fool, I had trusted them. I took a deep breath, opened the door, and walked into a scene that felt like a courtroom crossed with a burglary. Brian sat on my sofa, head in hands. Emma paced the living room like a caged lioness. And the stranger, a man in a gray suit, was rifling through my personal documents at the dining table. "What is happening here?" I asked, louder than I intended. All 3 turned. Emma spoke first, her voice laced with that urgent sweetness she always used when she wanted something. "Harold, thank God. We need to talk. This is Mr. Townsend. He's a family attorney." "Your situation has us worried," Brian added, looking up with eyes I barely recognized. "You've been acting strange." "Strange?" I echoed. "For canceling handouts?" Townsend stepped forward, extending his hand like this was some civil business meeting. "Mr. Becker, your children are concerned. They think you may be experiencing cognitive decline, and they've asked me to help assess whether guardianship would be in your best interest. I didn't take his hand. Instead, I walked to the table, picked up every document he had laid out, and tucked them back into the folder they came from. These are my papers. You have no right to be reading them. Dad, Brian said, using that condescending tone only someone younger and smugger than you would dare use. We're doing this because we care about you. No, you're doing this because I turned off the money tap, I snapped. And now, suddenly, I'm senile? Emma stepped closer, placing her hand on my arm like she was some loving daughter-in-law in a family sitcom. Harold, honey, at your age, confusion is normal. The word confusion flipped a switch in me. This wasn't concern. This was a coup. A slow, smiling, legal coup to steal what I had left. My voice dropped to a growl. I am not confused. I am clear for the first time in years. And you, all of you, are going to get out of my house. Now. Of? Brian stood up slowly, his face twisted in the same petulant expression he used to wear when I wouldn't buy him candy at the grocery store. Only this time he was 35, not 5, and the stakes weren't a bag of jelly beans, they were my entire life savings. Dad, you can't just cut us off. We have obligations, rent, bills, the car loan, you co-signed it, remember? I took a step back, disgusted at how quickly my own flesh and blood turned this into a negotiation. Who says I can't? I asked, voice sharp, steady. For 3 years, I paid rent on an apartment I've never set foot in. I kept your refrigerator stocked while you couldn't be bothered to pick up the phone on my birthday. I funded a wedding I wasn't even invited to. You think you're entitled to my help? No, son. You were gifted it. And now the gift is over. That's when the lawyer Townsend pulled out a folder and set it neatly on my table like he was about to pitch me a timeshare. Mr. Becker, he said smoothly, we've prepared a power of attorney document. It would allow Brian and Emma to help you manage your finances temporarily, until things stabilize. I didn't even open it. I walked directly to the trash can and dropped it in. The only thing being stabilized here, I said, is your exit from my life. Emma's eyes welled up with tears, perfectly timed, perfectly hollow. You can't do this to us, Harold. We counted on you. We've made plans. We have payments. We bought furniture. With my money, I said flatly. Not with respect. Not with love. Just money. And now that the money's gone, you're scrambling to make me look crazy. Brian tried to step toward me, but I didn't flinch. I wasn't afraid anymore. This wasn't the boy who used to crawl into my bed after nightmares. This was a grown man trying to steal from his own father with a smile and a signature. Dad, listen. We made mistakes. The wedding, it was a misunderstanding. Emma was stressed. I was overwhelmed. We can fix it. But you have to stop being unreasonable. Unreasonable? I said. Is that what we're calling boundaries now? Townsend gathered his things with professional efficiency. Mr. Becker, this isn't over. If your behavior continues to raise concern, your family has the right to petition the court. A judge could determine that you require guardianship. The threat hung in the air like a loaded gun on the table. They weren't just pushing, they were preparing for war. Mr. Townsend, I said, meeting his gaze dead on, I hope you've done your research. I'm a 74-year-old man who's managed his own finances for over 5 decades. I raised a son alone. I buried a wife. I paid off a mortgage, ran a household, and never missed a tax filing. And until last month, I was financially supporting 2 adults who apparently think thank you is optional. So if you want to take this to court, bring your best shot. But I promise you I'm not the one who should be worried. Emma stopped crying. Just like that. Her tears dried up like a faucet turned off. Cold, calculating, finally showing her real face. This won't stay like this, she said. We have lawyers too. Wonderful, I replied. Hire all you want. With your money, not mine. As they walked to the door, they carried the air of people who weren't used to being denied. Brian turned at the threshold. His voice was low, bitter. You're going to regret this, Dad. One day you'll be old, sick, alone. And when that day comes, don't expect us to be there. I stared at him for a long moment. I'm already alone, Brian, I said quietly. The only difference is now, it's by choice. When the door shut behind them, I stood still, listening to the silence. It was deafening, and yet, it was the most beautiful sound I'd heard in years. That night, I didn't sleep from sadness. I couldn't sleep because adrenaline pumped through my veins like electricity. Not fear, not guilt, power, control. I wasn't a victim anymore. I lay in bed planning methodically, like a soldier before a campaign. I wasn't going to run. I was going to fortify. If they wanted a legal fight, they would get one. But it would be a battle they'd have to fund themselves. I was done bankrolling my own destruction. At sunrise, I was already showered and dressed. First stop, Mr. Grayson's law office. He greeted me with a firm handshake and the kind of eyes that didn't blink when you told him your own son had become a predator. I explained everything, start to finish. Townsend, the documents, the threats. Grayson listened, nodding, occasionally taking notes. When I was done, he looked at me and said, "Harold, what you've just described is elder financial abuse, and depending on the next steps they take, we could be looking at a criminal case. You're not crazy. You're being targeted. And now, we protect you." For the first time in weeks, I exhaled. I wasn't imagining things. I wasn't being dramatic. I was being hunted by people who once called me Dad. And now, I was ready to fight back. We spent the next 3 hours combing through my financial records, and by the end of it, Mr. Grayson had a neat folder full of spreadsheets, printed statements, and annotated notes. Every transfer, every check, every so-called gift I'd handed over to Brian and Emma now lived on paper, totaled an undeniable $38,600 over the course of 3 years. "Harold," he said, tapping a page gently, "with this kind of documentation, not only can we defend against any guardianship petition they'd have to answer for their own misconduct. You've been exploited, plain and simple." He suggested we update my will immediately, locking down my assets and naming a neutral executor. We also filed a formal notice with the county, revoking any powers of attorney Brian may have tried to sneak through. Grayson wasn't just building a defense, he was constructing a fortress. I left his office calmer, more anchored. But I wasn't done. On the drive home, I stopped at the hardware store, no longer for light bulbs or minor repairs Brian had once promised to fix, but never did. No, this time I was here for security. "Mr. Becker," said Tom, the owner, surprised. "Don't tell me there's another plumbing issue at your son's place?" I shook my head. "Nope. This time it's for me. I need every lock in my house changed. And while I'm at it, I want a full home security system cameras, motion lights, the works." Tom raised his eyebrows, but didn't ask questions. His son Ethan, a quiet kid with sharp eyes and good hands, was already loading equipment into the back of his van. "We'll be there first thing tomorrow morning," he said. That evening I poured myself a glass of scotch and sat at the same table where I'd once written checks for their rent, their groceries, their dreams. Only this time, I wasn't calculating what I owed them. I was calculating what I owed myself. Peace, safety, self-respect. I turned off my phone for the night. I didn't want to see any calls from blocked numbers or read text messages full of empty apologies and new excuses. And sure enough, the next morning, just as Ethan and Tom were setting up the security system, the doorbell rang. I checked the monitor and saw an unfamiliar number on the screen. Against my better judgment, I picked up. "Harold," came Emma's voice, far too cheery. "Please don't hang up. I want to talk. Just talk." "Then talk," I said, not unkindly, but cold enough to keep the boundaries firm. "Look, I know you're upset. We made a mistake. The wedding, it was stupid not to include you. Brian and I have talked about it. We want to make it right. How about a dinner, just us three at your place? We can cook like we used to." The manipulation was clumsy now, transparent. Like watching someone try to pick your pocket with oven mitts on. "Emma," I said, "how much do you owe in rent?" Silence. Then, "About 2 months. So, $1,400. "But that's not why I'm calling." "Are you sure?" I interrupted. "Because it sounds like you miss my money more than you miss me." Her voice cracked a little. "Okay, I won't lie. We do need help. But we love you too. You're important to us." I leaned back in my chair. And yet, not important enough to sit at your wedding. Not important enough to get a single phone call that wasn't about bills. Tell me, Emma, when was the last time you called just to ask how I was doing? The silence that followed was answer enough. I sighed. Emma, I'm only going to say this once. For 3 years, you used me. You turned me into an ATM with a pulse. You smiled when the money flowed, and vanished when it didn't. You excluded me from your most important moment. And now, you want me to forget it all because rent is due? Please, Harold, don't do this. I'm not doing anything, Emma. I'm simply not undoing everything I allowed for too long. I ended the call and turned my phone off again. That afternoon, after the locks were changed and the last camera tested, I stood at my front door and felt something strange, safe. Not just physically, emotionally. For the first time in years, my home was mine again, my space, my sanctuary. Later that day, I walked next door and rang the bell. Evelyn Rogers opened the door with a warm smile and a coffee mug in hand. "Thought you might want some company," she said. We sat in my living room, me and this kind, observant woman who had heard the yelling days before, and I told her everything. She didn't interrupt. She didn't pity me. When I finished, she just nodded and said, "You did the right thing." Then, to my surprise, she told me her story. Her daughter had done the same thing. Loved her when money flowed, disappeared when it didn't. She cut her off 5 years ago. It took 6 months, but eventually her daughter came back not for cash, but for connection. That gave me hope. But Evelyn said something else that stayed with me. Even if your son never comes back, you'll have yourself. And at this stage of life, that's more valuable than anything. She was right. That night, I slept better than I had in years. Not because the house was safer, but because I was. The next morning, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in decades. No alarm, no to-do list dictated by other people's problems, just the sound of birds outside my window and the quiet thrum of my own thoughts. After breakfast, I did something I hadn't done in years. I called my sister, Marianne, in Portland. We used to talk every week, but over time our conversations had dwindled to short holiday check-ins. Looking back, I realized why. Every time we spoke, I turned the conversation into a monologue about Brian and Emma, how much I was helping them, how proud I was to be useful. I thought I was sharing good news. In reality, I was just giving a quarterly report on how I was letting myself be drained. When Marianne picked up, her voice was warm and surprised. "Harold, it's been a while." I smiled. "Too long. I've got a story you won't believe." For the next hour, I told her everything. The wedding betrayal, the confrontation, the lawyer, the threats, the locks, the cameras, the silence. And when I finished, Marianne didn't hesitate. "Harold, it was about damn time." Her words weren't cruel, they were liberating. "Every time we talked, it broke my heart to hear how much you gave and how little you got back. I didn't want to say anything because I knew you were trying to be a good father. But Harold, love doesn't need an invoice. And what Brian and Emma gave you wasn't love. It was dependence disguised as affection." Her words hit like a balm and a slap, both necessary. "You know what's worse?" she added. "At the last family gathering, when I saw Brian, not once did he mention missing you or thanking you. It was always, 'Dad helped us with this. Dad paid for that.' Like you were a credit card, not a person." I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Probably both. "And Emma," she continued, "always spoke about you in the future tense. When Harold passes, we'll inherit the house. Or when the money's ours, we'll remodel. It was like they were waiting for you to die so they could really start living." I sat in silence, letting her words soak in. All those nights I'd gone without, thinking I was securing their future. All the times I'd skipped buying myself a new pair of shoes because Brian needed help with a business idea that never materialized. And here they were, treating me not as a living, breathing human, but as a temporary barrier to their inheritance. That afternoon, Evelyn stopped by with a potted plant. "Something green to brighten the windowsill," she said. We sat again in the living room this time, 2 allies in a shared war. I told her about Marianne, about the conversation, about the things Emma had apparently said behind my back. Evelyn didn't look surprised. "My daughter used to say the same things," she said quietly. "The words change, but the pattern stays the same." She took a sip of her tea. "They all read from the same playbook. Chapter 1. Make the parent feel indispensable. Chapter 2. Create a constant crisis. Chapter 3. If the money stops, question their sanity. We both chuckled, but it wasn't a joyful laugh. It was the laughter of people who had seen too much and waited too long. Did you ever feel guilty? I asked her. Every single day, she said without hesitation. But guilt is just the tax we pay for choosing ourselves after a lifetime of choosing others. And eventually, that tax becomes freedom. That night, I drove to the cemetery for the first time in months. My wife, Lillian, had been gone for 23 years. I used to visit every week, but somewhere along the way I'd started skipping the trips. There was always a reason Brian needed help moving. Emma had a doctor's appointment, they needed money wired. That headstone, her name carved in granite, had become another thing I sacrificed without even realizing it. I brought fresh white roses, cleared away the dried leaves, and sat on the bench next to her grave. "I'm sorry, Lil," I whispered. "I think I lost myself for a while. After you died, I threw everything into Brian. I thought if I gave him enough, he'd never feel the pain we felt losing you. But in trying to protect him from pain, I think I raised someone who doesn't know what empathy even looks like." The wind rustled the leaves gently. For a moment, I imagined her nodding in that quiet, knowing way she used to. "I promise you," I said, "I'm done sacrificing. I'm going to live again." As I walked back to the car, I felt it a shift, not just in my body, but in my soul. I wasn't just reclaiming my money, I was reclaiming myself. When I got home, I checked the camera feed. Sure enough, Brian's car had passed by twice that day. Once at noon, again at 5. They were watching, circling, waiting for the next chance to manipulate, to intimidate. But I wasn't afraid anymore. They could drive by all they wanted. The doors were locked, the alarms were set, and the era of me bending over backward was officially over. They hadn't lost access to my money. They'd lost access to me. And I was finally beginning to understand that those were two very different things. The next few days passed with an eerie calm, like the quiet between storms, the kind of silence that doesn't settle, it sharpens. My camera notifications kept pinging with familiar images. Brian's car creeping by, sometimes slowing to a stop, sometimes idling for minutes before moving on. Emma's silhouette in the passenger seat, her head snapping toward the house like she expected me to rush outside with an apology and a check in hand. I didn't. I stayed inside, sipped my coffee, and watched from the screen as the two people who once called me family now circled my home like vultures waiting for something to die. Mr. Grayson had advised me to document everything. So I did every drive-by, every phone call, every text I didn't answer. And then, on a Friday morning just after breakfast, the doorbell rang again. This time, it wasn't Brian or Emma. Through the camera, I saw a young woman in a crisp blazer holding a leather-bound folder. Her posture was upright, her smile practiced. Government issue, I thought? Trouble wearing a name tag? I opened the door, and she introduced herself in a warm but official tone. "Good morning, Mr. Harold Becker. I'm from the Office of Senior Services. We've received a report about a potential at-risk situation involving your well-being. May I come in for a wellness check?" The words dropped like cold water down my spine. They'd done it. Brian and Emma had escalated to the state. A formal accusation, not just a smear campaign behind my back now. They were trying to build a legal case, brick by brick, to declare me incompetent and seize control. I held her gaze calmly. "May I see your ID?" She showed it to me. It was real. No bluff this time. I stepped aside and let her in, knowing that any resistance could be twisted and used against me. She took a seat in the living room, notebook in hand, and began a list of carefully worded questions. "Mr. Becker, we've been informed that you recently changed your financial behavior abruptly, that you've cut off communication with family members, installed an elaborate home security system, refused legal and medical assistance." I could hear Emma's voice behind every line. I could imagine her pacing their apartment, fabricating every accusation with just enough sugar to make it sound like concern. And I could feel the underlying goal of this visit, not to protect me, but to build a paper trail. I stopped the interview mid-question. "I'd like my attorney to be present before I continue this conversation." She hesitated. "Sir, this is not a legal interrogation, just a wellness check." I gave her a tight smile. "And I'm well. But if someone has accused me of being otherwise, I'd prefer legal clarity." 20 minutes later, Mr. Grayson arrived. The moment he walked in, the air in the room changed. He asked to see the investigator's documents, then calmly placed our own folder on the table, detailing every financial transaction between me and my son, a signed medical evaluation from Dr. Com, more affirming my mental clarity, and a printed timeline of recent events, including their home intrusion, an attempt to force me to sign a power of attorney. The social worker flipped through the documents slowly, her brow creasing with each page. "Mr. Becker," she said finally, "do you currently manage all your finances on your own?" I nodded. "Would you like to see my bank statements, tax returns, or investment portfolio? They're all up to date. And you live here independently?" "I do. I drive. I cook. I clean. I also have friends, hobbies, and no current need for psychiatric care or babysitting." Mr. Grayson added, "My client has shown zero evidence of diminished capacity. What you're seeing is not confusion, it's boundaries. And some people don't like that." The young woman sighed, her posture less confident now. "Based on what I've seen today and the documents you've provided, I don't see any cause for intervention. I'll be closing the case." She left quietly. But as soon as the door shut, I turned to Mr. Grayson. "What now?" He folded his arms. "Now, we prepare for the lawsuit." And sure enough, the letter arrived a week later, certified mail, sealed with legal weight. Brian and Emma had filed a formal petition in family court to have me declared mentally incompetent and place Brian as my legal guardian. A move so audacious, so repulsive, I almost admired the gall of it. Almost. "They're going all in," Mr. Grayson said as he read through the filing. "They've submitted witness statements, fabricated medical concerns, and get this, they even listed unpaid doctor's bills that don't exist." I shook my head, stunned. "And the witnesses?" "Emma, a neighbor named Mr. Langford. And your pharmacist." "Me pharmacist?" My stomach dropped. That afternoon we drove straight to the pharmacy. Mr. Green, the man behind the counter, looked startled when he saw me. "Mr. Becker," he stammered, "is everything okay?" I cut to the point. "Did you sign something for Emma claiming I had erratic behavior with my medications?" His face went pale. "She said it was for a health insurance questionnaire." "I didn't know." "You didn't verify? You just handed over a statement?" Mr. Grayson stepped in before I said something sharper. "We'll need a corrected statement, Mr. Green. Immediately." Next was Mr. Langford, the neighbor across the street who'd always glared when my friends parked in front of his home. His testimony? That I had become paranoid and hostile. That I yelled at my family and barricaded myself in the house. Which, in reality, meant I told trespassers to leave and installed a security system after being threatened in my own living room. They weren't just trying to take my money. They were trying to erase me, rewrite the narrative, and position themselves as the loving children of a confused old man. But they had underestimated something important. I had the truth, and more than that, I had nothing left to lose. Mr. Grayson and I spent the rest of that week building a wall of defense so airtight it could hold up in a hurricane. He brought in Dr. Moore, my evaluating psychologist again, this time to schedule a full neurocognitive assessment with detailed written results. Not just a letter saying I was fine, but formal documentation with metrics, test scores, and professional conclusions that left no room for maybe. I wasn't just mentally competent, I was sharper than most people half my age. When I completed the last logic test and Dr. Moore looked up at me, she smiled and said, "Mr. Becker, if this is confusion, I'd like to be confused just like you." But even with every I dotted and every T crossed, I knew what was coming wouldn't be fair. I'd read enough stories over the years, people stripped of their rights because someone with enough confidence and lies convinced a judge otherwise. This wasn't about justice. This was about appearances. And Brian and Emma knew how to play that game. The sweet, worried son. The tearful, supportive daughter-in-law. Concerned faces masking dollar signs. It made me sick to think how long they'd probably been planning this. Evelyn stopped by that evening, holding a bottle of red wine and a determined look on her face. Time to rally the troops, she said. That night, 5 women from her garden club filled my living room: Cynthia, Maria, Alfreda, Teresa, and Evelyn herself, all of them in their 60s, 70s, and 80s, all of them with stories that mirrored mine like ghostly reflections. One had cut off a brother who drained her retirement fund. Another had been conned by a granddaughter. Another had fought and won a court battle against her own children, who tried to declare her mentally unfit just to speed up their inheritance. We sat in a circle, sipping wine and swapping stories that would make a stranger cry. But there was no self-pity here, only strength. These weren't victims. These were survivors. Veterans of familial betrayal. Alfreda, who was 82 and looked like she could scare a judge just by raising an eyebrow, took my hand. Harold, if they want to fight, you give them one. But don't fight angry. Fight smart, with documentation, with dignity. That's how you win. And if they make you feel like you're alone again, you remember this: you're not. Her words stayed with me. That night, I sat on my porch beneath the stars and let the weight of it all settle into something different. Not despair, not fear, resolve. I knew what had to be done. And I also knew I'd already said goodbye to the son I used to believe in. There would be no healing after this. No miracle moment where he knocked on my door, eyes full of regret. Brian wasn't coming back, not as the man I raised. And maybe, I thought, that was okay. Because what he'd become wasn't someone I wanted in my life anyway. The next morning I started calling my witnesses. Cynthia agreed immediately. "You're sharper than my grandkids," she said. Maria laughed. "You remember more details than my accountant does." Evelyn didn't hesitate. "I'll bring the plant I gave you. It's still alive. That proves you're competent right there." We gathered letters, statements, anything that would show the court I had friends, a social life, mental clarity, and most importantly, no dependence on anyone, especially not Brian and Emma. I also made a quiet visit to the cemetery. Not for sadness this time, but to speak honestly with Lillian. "You always warned me about enabling, didn't you?" I said softly. "You said love doesn't mean saying yes every time someone asks. I didn't want Brian to feel the absence of a mother and a father. I tried to make up for the hole you left. But I see now, I filled that hole with money. And in doing so, I made him believe he never had to stand on his own. I placed new lilies by her headstone and promised her, and myself, that I would no longer apologize for protecting what was left of my life, that I would not surrender to guilt or fear, that I would not spend the rest of my years waiting for people to value me for more than what I could give. 2 days before the hearing, another car pulled up outside my house. Not Brian's, not Emma's. This time, a sleek black vehicle with tinted windows, and a vanity license plate that read Lawpro 1, their attorney. I didn't answer the door. Instead, I watched through the camera as he slid a thick manila envelope into my mailbox and drove off. Mr. Grayson reviewed it that evening. "They're submitting new evidence," he said, flipping through pages. "A statement from a psychiatrist we've never heard of. Claims that your refusal to submit to their evaluation is proof of paranoia. Claims you've been isolated, unstable. Claims your financial decisions are irrational." I stared at the document like it had a pulse, like it was alive and feeding off the life I'd built. "They're really going for it," I said. "Yes," Grayson nodded. "But so are we." "Oh." The next morning I went to the courthouse with my head held high, a full folder of supporting documents under my arm, and Evelyn waiting for me at the curb like a proud general sending her soldier into battle. "Whatever happens in there," she said, gripping my hand, "you already won the most important thing. You chose yourself. That's something most people never do." I smiled. "And if I come out of there needing a drink, I'm calling you first." "Good," she said, "because I already have the bottle chilled." And with that, I stepped through the courthouse doors, ready to face the people who used to be my family, and to prove, once and for all, that they may have underestimated me, but they would never silence me. The courthouse smelled like floor wax and tension. Every footstep echoed, every voice a hushed murmur beneath fluorescent lights that buzzed like a nervous tick. I arrived early, too early, probably, but I needed to sit, breathe, remind myself of who I was before all of this. A man, a father, a husband, a person with a full history and a clear mind, not the confused old relic Brian and Emma were trying to paint me as. Mr. Grayson arrived 5 minutes later, briefcase in hand, face unreadable but calm. "Judge Martin's presiding," he said as we walked down the corridor. "She's known to be measured, sharp. She won't fall for theatrics." I nodded, though I didn't fully believe it yet. I'd seen how convincing Brian and Emma could be when they turned on the charm. Wolves in wedding attire. When we entered the courtroom, they were already seated at the petitioner's table. Brian in a suit too expensive for someone behind on rent. Emma in a black dress, her makeup subtle but strategically designed to enhance the illusion of concern. She looked at me as I walked in, not with guilt but calculation. I didn't bother meeting her gaze. Brian shifted uncomfortably, probably realizing that the man who just walked in didn't look fragile. I didn't limp. I didn't shuffle. I didn't need help with my briefcase. I stood tall and calm because I was neither a victim nor a fool. I was ready. The judge entered and the room rose. She was in her 60s, her silver hair tied neatly, her robe pressed sharp. Her eyes scanned the room, not with emotion but with discernment, as if she could spot falsehood from 100 feet away. "This is the matter of Brian Becker and Emma Becker versus Harold Becker," she began, her voice even, authoritative. "Petitioners are seeking a court-appointed guardianship based on alleged mental incapacity. Mr. Grayson, Mr. Becker, you may proceed with your defense following petitioner's case." Their attorney started with an opening statement that made my blood simmer. "Your Honor, Mr. Becker has demonstrated a sudden and alarming shift in behavior. He has isolated himself, refused contact with his only son and daughter-in-law, withdrawn financial support with no warning, and engaged in paranoid actions such as installing surveillance systems and refusing medical consultation. These patterns are deeply concerning for a man of 74. He paused, as if letting the word 74 hang in the air like a diagnosis. "We believe Mr. Becker is under undue influence from recent acquaintances, and in his current state is incapable of managing his financial affairs." Then came the parade of witnesses. Emma took the stand first, her voice shaky, perfectly performed. "Harold was like a father to me," she said, dabbing fake tears with a tissue. "But recently he's changed. He stopped answering calls. He shut us out. We're just worried about him, that's all." Mr. Grayson's cross-examination cut through the act like a scalpel. "Mrs. Becker, when was the last time you contacted Mr. Becker without requesting money?" She hesitated. "We spoke all the time." "That's not what I asked. I don't remember the exact date. Did you invite him to your wedding?" "It was very small." "Did you or did you not say to him, 'Only special people were invited'?" Her face tightened. It was taken out of context. What would be the appropriate context for such a statement? Silence. Brian followed. He fumbled his way through rehearsed concern. "My dad, he's always been there for me, but lately he's been erratic, like he's not himself. We just want to make sure he's okay." When asked about the money, Brian dodged. When asked about the power of attorney attempt, he lied. And when asked whether he had ever visited me just to check in, without needing anything, he fell silent. Their neighbor witness, Mr. Langford, gave vague, angry testimony about how I yelled and acted paranoid, which, under cross-examination, turned out to mean I had told him not to trespass. Finally, their expert, a psychiatrist they had hired, privately testified that my refusal to be evaluated by him was, in his opinion, a red flag. Mr. Grayson responded by handing the judge a folder with Dr. Moore's evaluation and test results. "Your Honor, I believe we have actual, credible medical documentation that tells a much different story." And then it was our turn. Witness after witness described me not just as competent, but engaged, alert, social. Dr. Moore testified with unwavering confidence. Evelyn spoke with warmth and fierce conviction. Even my pharmacist returned to clarify he had been misled and regretted signing anything without full understanding. When it was finally my turn to take the stand, I rose with a quiet calm and looked the judge in the eye. This wasn't about vengeance. It was about truth, and I was ready to tell mine. I stepped up to the witness stand, the courtroom unnervingly still, as though the walls themselves were waiting to hear whether the old man with silver hair and steady hands would crumble or hold. I took the oath, sat down, and folded my hands calmly on my lap. "Mr. Grayson approached slowly, no dramatics, Just that quiet assurance I had come to trust. "Mr. Becker," he began, "can you tell the court why you chose to stop financially supporting your son and daughter-in-law?" I took a breath, not to calm myself, but to make sure I didn't let anger steal the clarity I had earned. "Because I realized," I said clearly, "that I wasn't giving from love. I was being drained through obligation. I wasn't a father to them anymore. I was an income stream. I was useful but not respected. I was generous, but never truly valued. The wedding proved that. When they married without me, told me only special people were invited, that was the moment I stopped being blind." The judge's expression didn't change, but I saw the flicker of attention sharpen behind her eyes. I went on. "I spent over $38,000 on them in 3 years. Rent, groceries, gifts, medical bills, furniture. I pulled money from my retirement, from what my wife and I had saved before she passed. I did it gladly, until I realized I was funding a relationship that only existed when a bill was due." Mr. Grayson nodded. "Have you ever been diagnosed with any form of cognitive decline?" I passed every neurocognitive test Dr. Moore gave me. And I don't just manage my own finances. I track them to the cent. I've filed every tax return, paid every bill, kept every receipt. I don't need help. I needed distance." He stepped back. "Thank you, Mr. Becker." Then came the cross-examination. Brian's attorney rose, confident, slick. He tried to rattle me, asking if I had become paranoid, if I isolated myself, if I had trust issues. I looked at him calmly. "Installing cameras after your house is broken into isn't paranoia, it's protection. Refusing to hand over your life savings to people who lie to your face isn't a trust issue, it's common sense." He shifted tactics. "Isn't it true that your emotional state may be influencing your judgment?" "Of course I'm emotional," I said, voice firm. "Anyone would be, watching their only son attempt to strip away their autonomy through the legal system. But emotion doesn't erase logic. And emotion doesn't mean incompetence. It means I'm still human." He tried one last time. "Do you regret cutting your family out?" I didn't hesitate. I regret waiting so long to do it." That was the moment something shifted in the room. Not a gasp, not a word, but a weight. A quiet acknowledgement that they had tried to paint me as broken, and I had refused to play the part. When I stepped down from the stand, I didn't feel exhausted. I felt lighter. Judge Martin recessed for deliberation, and for 2 hours we waited, the silence in the courtroom thick with unspoken truths. And then she returned, her voice even but final. "This court finds that Mr. Harold Becker is fully competent to manage his affairs. The petition for guardianship is denied." I didn't cheer. I didn't cry. I simply exhaled 3 years of shame, fear, manipulation, all gone in one breath. It wasn't just a legal victory. It was a reclamation. I had defended not just my rights, but my dignity. And as I turned to leave, I didn't look back at Brian or Emma. Whatever expression they wore didn't matter anymore. Because from that moment forward, I was no longer their source of comfort, income, or control. I was, finally, just myself again. And that was more than enough. And that's where we'll leave this story, a reminder that love can protect us in ways we never see coming, and that betrayal, even when it strikes closest to home, can be transformed into strength. If this journey resonated with you, if it stirred something inside, whether it was anger, sadness, or even hope, then I invite you to take one small step that makes a big difference. Subscribe to this channel. By subscribing, you're not just supporting the work that goes into bringing these stories to life. You're joining a community of listeners who believe in the power of storytelling, to heal, to inspire, and to remind us we're not alone. Think of it as more than a button. It's a promise that you'll never miss the next story, that might mirror your own struggles or open your eyes to someone else's. And while you're here, please take a moment to leave a comment letting us know where you're listening from. Your words matter, your perspective matters. Sometimes the right story at the right time can reach someone who needs it most, and maybe your comment will be the spark that connects them. So don't just move on. Hit subscribe, share this with a friend, and let's keep building this circle of voices together. Until next time, take care of yourself. And never forget the quiet power of love, protection, and resilience.